We've seen how to use the form builder to create the root form group by specifying a form control with a default value for each of our input elements. Let's examine how to specify the validation rules here as well. Recall from the last module that we have three choices of syntax when defining a form control. We define a key-value pair, where the key is the form control name and the value is the default input element value, such as an empty string or true in this example. Or we can provide a key-value pair where the value is an object with a value in disabled state. Or we define the form control's key-value pair where the value is an array. The first element of the array is the default input element value. The array syntax is the one we use to set validation rules for the form control. We set the validation rules in the second element of the array. For built-in validators, we use the validators class and specify the name of the desired validation rule. In this example, we set the required validator. To specify multiple validation rules for a form control, use an array. In this example, we set the required validator and the min-length validator, passing in a 3 to specify a minimum length of 3 characters. So the first element of the array is the default value, and the second element of the array is an array of validation rules. The third element of the array, which is not shown here, is for any asynchronous validators. An asynchronous validator, as its name suggests, is for asynchronous validation operations. The most common use of asynchronous validation is calling a server-side validation method. To minimize the asynchronous calls, asynchronous validators are not executed until all synchronous validators pass validation. Notice that we can mix and match these styles. The first name control uses an array because it has a validator. The send catalog form control specifies a simple default value because it needs no validator. So we can use the appropriate form control syntax for the requirements of each form control. Now let's set up some built-in validators. Looking at the HTML, we can see that the first name input element has 2 validation attributes, required and a min-length of 3. Let's delete these validation rules from the HTML. Now let's add them to the component class. Angular Forms provides a validators class that has the basic validators built in. We import validators from Angular Forms to access those basic validators. We want to add validators to our first name form control here, so we change the single value to an array. The first element of the array is our default value. The second element is for our validators. We can specify a single validator or an array of validators. In this example, we need both required and min-length, so we'll define an array of validators. We set validators.required to mark the input element as required, and validators.minLength passing in a 3 to require a minimum length of 3 characters. Let's check it out in the browser. Set focus into the first name, click out, and we see our required validation message. Now let's repeat this process for each of our other input elements. In the HTML, the last name has required and max length. Let's delete these here and add them to our form control here. We change the single value to an array, then add the validators. Validators.required, validators.maxLength 50. In the HTML, the email has required and pattern. Let's copy our pattern before we delete it, and add them to our form control here, passing in the desired pattern. Our send catalog binds to a checkbox, so no validation is required. Let's check out the browser and see if all of our validation still works. First name, yes. Last name, yep. Email, you betcha. Our validation is now in our class. That was pretty easy. But how do we change that validation based on some criteria, such as a user selection?